Harlem did not go to sleep easy in those years. It breathed through open windows and cracked doors, through jazz that floated like smoke, through prayers whispered over empty plates, and through the hard footsteps of men who knew tomorrow might not come. In the middle of all that noise, a different sound began to rise, low and dangerous, like thunder far away. It was the sound of an outsider pushing into a neighborhood that did not belong to him, and it was the sound of Harlem deciding whether it would bow its head or lift its chin. In the early 1930s, a white gangster from the Bronx named Dutch Schultz pushed his way toward Harlem's money, and a young black enforcer named Bumpy Johnson stepped forward to stop him, even when stopping him felt like stepping in front of a speeding train. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson was born in Charleston, South Carolina, and the story says he carried a bump on the back of his head that earned him a nickname that would outlive him. People later spoke that nickname like it was a warning, but in the beginning, it was just the name of a boy growing up in a world where a wrong look could turn into a beating, and a small insult could turn into a lifetime of anger. His family saw that fire in him early. They saw his short temper, and they saw how he could not pretend to be quiet when he felt disrespected. Then came the fear that changed everything, when his older brother was accused of killing a white man, and the family feared a lynch mob. It was the kind of fear that made people sell what little they had just to buy safety. That fear helped push young Bumpy north, away from the South, toward Harlem, where he would learn that escaping one kind of danger often meant walking straight into another. Source: Harlem is often remembered for bright things, for music and art and people dressed sharp on Sunday, but for many families it was also crowded streets, hard work, and rules that kept black people boxed in. Many banks did not welcome black customers, and many doors stayed shut no matter how hard someone knocked. In that kind of place, people created their own ways to survive. They found work where they could, and they made games out of hope because hope was cheaper than food. For Bumpy, Harlem was a new kind of school, one that taught lessons fast and punished mistakes even faster. He dropped out of school and worked small jobs, but the street pulled harder than any classroom. He began to move closer to the world of hustlers and gamblers, where respect was a kind of money and fear was a kind of shield. He got noticed by local gangsters and started to learn how power worked in a city that did not promise fairness to him. Source: to understand the fight that would explode around 1930, you have to understand the numbers game, also called policy. It was not just gambling. It was a neighborhood habit, a small dream that fit in a pocket. People could bet a tiny amount and imagine a big change. In a place where wages were low and rent was high, the idea of hitting the right number felt like a ladder out of a hole. The numbers business became a whole system, with runners collecting bets, controllers watching totals, and bankers financing everything behind the scenes. It was illegal, but it was also woven into daily life, and it moved so much money that it began to look like a shadow version of a real economy. For many Harlem families, it felt like one of the few games where they were allowed to play at all. Source: before Dutch Schultz arrived, Harlem already had rulers, and one of the most famous was Stephanie St. Clair, known as Madame Queen or the Queen of the Policy Rackets. She was not a myth. She was a real woman with real money and real nerve, and in a world dominated by men, she held power anyway. She ran a numbers operation that employed people and supported businesses, and she became known for speaking loudly about police corruption and harassment. She even testified about kickbacks and corruption, refusing to act like she was supposed to be silent. Some people feared her, some admired her, and many needed the jobs and the money her world provided. She was not trying to be a saint. She was trying to survive and stay in control. Source: Bumpy Johnson did not rise alone. He rose inside someone else's system first, and that system belonged to Madame St. Clair. He became her associate and enforcer, the man who stood close enough to danger that danger began to recognize him back. In the early 1930s, he climbed quickly, becoming trusted because he could do what needed to be done, and because he carried himself like someone who would not fold when threatened. Harlem respected strength, even when it came from a dark place, and Bumpy's strength was not just physical. He watched, he learned, and he understood that power was not only about violence. It was also about timing, loyalty, reputation, and the ability to make others believe you could not be pushed. Around 1930, a new force moved toward Harlem's numbers profits. After Prohibition ended, many big criminal groups looked for new income, and Harlem's numbers money drew them like light draws moths. Dutch Schultz, a Bronx-based gangster, was one of the first to push in hard. He did not come asking politely. He used fear, beatings, and killings to pressure numbers operators into paying him protection or handing over control. The message was simple: pay up, work for him, or suffer. To Schultz, Harlem was not a community. It was a market. To Harlem, Schultz was not just a criminal. He was an invader. Source: this is where the challenge begins, not as one clean moment in a movie, but as a chain of choices. Stephanie St. Clair refused to pay protection to Schultz, even as violence and intimidation grew around her. And standing beside her was Bumpy Johnson, her chief enforcer, watching the pressure rise and the danger spread across blocks like spilled oil. Refusing to pay was not just stubbornness. It was a statement that Harlem did not have to give away what it built. It was also a gamble, because Schultz had money, connections, and men ready to kill. But St. Clair had pride and she had Bumpy, and they both understood that once you start paying, you never stop paying. Their refusal was the first true challenge, and it told Schultz that Harlem had at least one corner that would not bend. The war that followed was not always loud like a battlefield, but it was deadly. People later said it led to many murders and kidnappings, and the streets carried that fear every day. In a neighborhood where kids played on stoops and families tried to live normal lives, violence could erupt suddenly, then vanish, leaving only whispers behind. Bumpy's job was to protect St. Clair's business and to push back against Schultz's control. The conflict was not just about money. It was also about humiliation. Schultz's push into Harlem carried racial power, the message that black business, even illegal business, could be taken by force when a white gangster decided it was his. The resistance against him became personal for many people who felt tired of always being told to step aside. Bumpy and St. Clair were not only fighting Schultz's men, they were also fighting a system that could lean in Schultz's favor. St. Clair accused police of corruption and harassment, and she used public pressure as a weapon, even tipping off police about Schultz's operations in her effort to hit him where it hurt. In this world, the line between law and crime was thin, and it moved depending on who had the money and influence. Harlem's numbers bankers could be raided, arrested, and humiliated, while Schultz's operation could often keep moving, protected by fear and by connections. That meant Bumpy's challenge was not just against one gangster. It was against the idea that Harlem's people had no right to defend what they ran. Defiance has a price, and in this story the price was paid in arrests, lost money, and lost lives. St. Clair's fight with Schultz brought heavy attention from police, and the pressure did not stop just because her cause sounded brave. The underworld never offers clean victories. It demands payment even when you win. While St. Clair resisted, the danger around her grew, and she eventually faced arrest and imprisonment. The war did not end with a parade. It dragged on until the people at the center were worn down, surrounded, and forced to make choices that felt like surrender even when they were called survival. Dutch Schultz did not die because Bumpy Johnson personally pulled the trigger. Schultz's end came later, when bigger forces in organized crime decided he was too dangerous and too disruptive. After Schultz was murdered in 1935, Bumpy struck a deal with the mafia, building his own power in Harlem in exchange for business arrangements. In the underworld, this is how peace is often made, not by forgiveness but by contracts. The war had been bad for business. The new order meant the Italian mob would have influence, and Bumpy would have room to operate as Harlem's gatekeeper. It was not the pure victory some might imagine, but it was a turning point, because it proved Bumpy could survive a war with a larger enemy and still come out standing. After those early battles, Bumpy Johnson's name grew heavier. He became the man others had to speak to if they wanted things done in Harlem. His power was built on reputation, connections, and the memory that he had stood in the storm when others hid. Harlem began to see him as more than a fighter. Some saw him as a protector, some as a predator of his own, but nearly everyone understood that he was now part of the neighborhood's real leadership, the kind that did not wear a badge or hold office but still shaped daily life. His story became tangled with Harlem itself, the way legends often do, until it was hard to tell where the man ended and the myth began. Source Bauer did not save Bumpy from prison. In the early 1950s, he was convicted in a drug conspiracy case and sentenced to 15 years, serving much of that time at Alcatraz. Prison has a way of shrinking even the biggest names, forcing them into routines and walls and silence. Yet his legend continued to grow, partly because absence can make a person seem larger. When he was released in the early 1960s, Harlem had changed again, but his name still opened doors. He had been arrested many times in his life, and prison was never just a chapter for him. It was a shadow that followed him, proof that the life he lived always demanded payment. Source: Bumpy Johnson was not only a gangster in public stories. He was also a husband and a father, and he carried relationships that grounded him, even when his world was unstable. He married Mame Hatcher and had children, and those details matter because they remind us he was not a movie character. He was a human being who ate meals, argued, laughed, and worried, even while living in a world where betrayal could come from anyone. That mix of ordinary life and dangerous power is part of why people still talk about him. It is hard to understand how someone can be both feared and familiar, but Harlem knew that contradiction well. Source: in the end, the streets did not take Bumpy Johnson in a dramatic shootout. He died of a heart attack in Harlem, at Wells' restaurant, late at night, with food on the table. That kind of ending feels almost strange for a man tied to so much violence. But it is also fitting in a quiet way, because Harlem's underworld was never only gunfire. It was also diners, conversations, routines, and the slow wear of stress. His death did not erase his impact, it sealed it. It turned him fully into a story people would retell, each time adding emotion, each time shaping him into what they needed him to be. Source: when we say 1930, when Bumpy Johnson first challenged Dutch Schultz, we are not talking about one clean showdown. We are talking about a moment in history when Harlem's underground economy, built by black hands in a city that often denied black opportunity, was targeted by an outsider who believed force could take anything. We are talking about Stephanie St. Clair refusing to pay, and Bumpy standing beside her, turning that refusal into resistance. We are talking about a chain reaction that led to bloodshed, pressure, arrests, and finally a new order where Bumpy learned to survive not only with courage but with negotiation. The challenge mattered because it showed Harlem that even in the shadows, dignity could still be defended, even if the defense came from imperfect people in an imperfect world. In the end, the story is not just about crime. It is about power, pride, and the dangerous cost of saying no when everyone expects you to say yes. Source: